I'm with Sarah McLaughlin, everybody. Welcome to Walk-ins Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. I'm excited to talk to you about your book today. Tell me, you wrote this book that actually we discussed when Greg Lukianoff came on my podcast recently. And he mentioned what you were writing about. And I'm like, oh, I have to get her on to talk about this because it's such a juicy topic. You wrote this book, Authoritarians in the Academy, and how the internationalization of higher education and borderless censorship threaten free speech. Tell me what inspired you to write this book?
Yes, clearly you know about FIRE, a Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. So I've been there for a long time, around 13 years maybe. And for a long time, I was working directly with students and professors who came to FIRE because they needed help because they were dealing with some kind of censorship. But the longer I worked on this issue, I began to realize that there was kind of like a hidden free speech crisis going on in higher education. And it's not just about, kind of the traditional flashpoints in US politics that we're familiar with, like abortion or race or guns, but that there was, kind of a quieter but still very serious censorship crisis happening to people who are critics of foreign governments, primarily the Chinese government, and their ability to express themselves freely in higher education today because of the way that, A, authoritarian governments like to censor speech outside their borders, but B, the way that higher education has become a global industry and sort of brought on a lot of new challenges and threats in the way it's internationalized.
Yeah, that's really fascinating because what you mean is like kids come to school, go to schools in the United States from China and feel like they can't really push back or speak out against anything in China because when they go home, they'll be punished or their families will be punished. Is this what you
That's
mean?
yeah, that's exactly part of it. I've spoken to students. I've heard the stories of many students who come here from China, and they come here expecting what American universities promise: a free space for people to speak their minds, to protest, to research, to write. Obviously that right has been under attack for a long time in many ways, but it's still, what we expect of higher education. We have students coming here from authoritarian countries and expecting that they're going to be able to participate in, the American freedoms that we prioritize, and then find that either the Chinese government has in some ways followed them here, they're still being surveilled when they get here. You aren't really speaking freely on the internet
Yeah.
if everything you do is being watched and saved, and if there's a file being built on you. And these students have sometimes even had their parents brought in for questioning because of what they've done and said while here in the United States. And there's even been cases of students being sentenced to prison because of tweets they posted here in the US. So
Wow.
that's just kind of like one slice of what's happening. And, another part of it is that they don't really think that they can trust their universities to defend them because, A, there have been some troubling incidents where universities have failed to do that. And B, they look at universities and they see, okay, my university has a campus in China. It used to have a Confucius Institute. It has all these joint partnerships. Are they really going to prioritize me over all of these financial opportunities that they're going to want to protect?
Can you give me a specific example of a university protecting a different country over a student?
Yeah, it's funny. I had actually sat down to start writing this book in early 2022, and a sort of perfect example of what I'm talking about emerged at George Washington University. A group of students anonymously posted artwork from a Australian Chinese artist called Badia Chow, and the artwork was very critical of the Olympic Games being held in China. And it was essentially, from far away, it might look like it's posters promoting China's Olympic Games, but when you get closer, you realize it was actually drawing attention to human rights abuses in China and, the ethical and moral challenges of hosting the Olympics there. So students put these up. and some other student groups. One group that I talk about a lot, the Chinese Students and Scholars Association, they complained to the university and they said that the posters were offensive and hurtful and that they insulted China and that the university had to act. And the university did act. They took the posters down. The president of the university at the time said that he was personally offended by the posters and that he was going to make sure they were removed and that he was actually going to try to unmask the people who had posted them, which is a really incredible thing to say, that you're going to use your university's, security forces to try to figure out who anonymously criticized the Chinese government.
Yeah, that's
Um,
insane.
yeah, like it was a really thoughtless and careless act, and I don't think, my guess is that a university saw students complaining about something offensive on campus and wanted to act about it, but didn't really think through what it would mean to create a track record and create a disciplinary history for students. And as I pointed out at the time, what they were putting students at the risk of was if these were international students from China, and at least some of them it turned out ultimately were, they were putting them at risk of really serious retaliation at home from their families at home. And so fortunately, the university did the difficult thing of admitting it had made a mistake and reversed course. But um, I don't think that after that happened, students who wanted to protest the Chinese government at GW would feel like they could safely do so without not only being censored, but also maybe, being at risk of really severe trouble when they return home just because they protested here.
How were they put in the position where they decided to apologize? Like, who pushed was it everybody pushing back, or was it you guys at Fire pushing back?
So we at Fire wrote it up and we said, what's happening. We told any students who were involved, if they need assistance, to reach out to us. I think there were some senators who maybe even responded. So there was pretty widespread attention on this. And I think, without that, it's possible that GW wouldn't have changed course. So it's hard to know what would have happened without that. But fortunately, we had a lot of attention on this, and that's the way it was able to change. But there are some times where these things are going to happen, and you will not have a senator tweeting about it. And what
Mhm.
happens in those cases, it's hard to say.
Is there a lot of examples of universities censoring themselves to appease foreign governments?
So it's hard to say exactly how often it happens because a self-censorship is a uniquely difficult thing to track.
Yeah,
It's hard to have an
it's
exact.
self-reported.
Yeah, yeah. Well, first off, it's not something that universities are going to want to admit to,
Right.
and it's hard to even know how to track something that happens within the confines of a person's mind if it's never written down on paper. But there have been, some incidents that we do know about and that we can look at to get a sense of how this works. So I think a really good example took place at Harvard Law in, I believe it was 2015. And so there, the university was hosting a Chinese dissident and lawyer at the campus for that year. And he had wanted to host an event on the campus about human rights in China and the ways that the Chinese government was violating rights. And so he, was contacted by a vice dean at Harvard Law who said, you need to move this event. Now's not a good time. Harvard's president is going to be in China when you want to hold that event, and is going to be meeting with Xi Jinping. And so that is going to be embarrassing for the university, and it's going to be difficult for our partnerships there. And so I think, and he ultimately did have to cancel the event and he wasn't able to go forward with it. And so these are the kinds of things that can happen behind the scenes where, it's almost helpful in some ways when administrators are honest and upfront about the reasons why they want to hold these events or cancel these events. There was a disturbing incident in I believe it was 2008 or 2009 at NC State University. There, they ultimately chose to disinvite the Dalai Lama because the Confucius Institute on the campus had complained, and the university admitted that it didn't want to harm the university's ties or the state of North Carolina's ties to the Chinese government. And
Mm.
so there were a lot of efforts in the early 2000s, especially by Chinese consulates, to sort of police the way that universities would invite speakers, especially the Dalai Lama. And in some ways, that attempts to influence like that by consulates have changed, but that pressure is still there, and it's just in different formats.
Interesting. Is it just China, or are there other people who are involved and engaged in this?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And so, just because of the way that higher ed works, because the way that universities have these relationships with China, they have major student exchange happening between the US and China. Just because of those ties, the Chinese government is able to try to control the discourse this way. But it's not, a problem with China. It's a problem with authoritarianism. It's a problem with governments that seek to silence their critics. And so I think that we are at risk of seeing this coming from more countries. The
Like the
more
UK?
UK has a lot of its own problems it's got to deal
Yeah.
with. Um, but I think we're at risk of seeing it. Like the more it works, the more I think others will try it. I've even seen, perhaps some suggestions that the Indian government is, more interested in trying to pursue what people say outside of its borders too. So it's not a problem just with China. It's just that China has the sway and the tools that some other countries perhaps don't. I think, for example, Russia is obviously you know, very interested in shutting people up, sometimes by murderous means, but they don't have the same amount of sway within higher education. So if they did, I'm sure they would be doing the same things as well. But it's just, it kind of depends on how much authority and sway a government has within the global higher ed space.
Wasn't there a recent wasn't Trump saying that we should let 600,000 Chinese students in recently? I feel like that was a news story that I
He
saw but didn't continue to look at.
he did say that. I think they've already reversed course on that. I'm not sure that there's a clear policy or plan when it comes to how many student visas they intend to allot. The numbers I think are starting to drop off, and honestly, I think it's unfortunate. I want higher ed to be a place where students from around the world can come here and can speak their minds. I think it's good for students. I think it's good for students from the U.S. and outside the U.S. I think there's a lot of value to it, and it's just that we have to ensure that our universities are familiar with the ways that foreign censorship can influence campus, but it doesn't necessarily mean we need to try to close out who can access it.
But isn't so much of it just following the money? I mean, how much money is involved in because I feel like in education, it's not so clear as like, "Hey, we're gonna sponsor you." It's always it's there's more shady ways to get money and influence in a way that's more insidious than if you were just directly paying somebody.
Yeah, and I think it's not much of a mystery what's happening here. A lot of it is money, and it is yeah, it's money, and it's the way that universities want to become global institutions because there's a lot of prestige to that and a lot of opportunities. Um, so yes, there's a lot of money. There's billions and billions of dollars in question here, and I don't think it's I'm always sort of baffled when people suggest that the money doesn't have any effect because we understand what it means when there's a lot of money involved. It
Yeah.
usually creates incentives. It's not a mystery. If you're receiving a lot of money from some place, you're going to want to protect your access to that money.
Mhm.
It's not even just within higher ed; it's any industry. That's just how it works. So yeah, money is a big part of it, and that money can come in the form of grants, or it can just be the tuition that comes from having large contingents of international students.
Yeah. Look, guys, most of us struggle with weight loss. It's a very common problem. But if you truly want to lose weight in a way that is healthy for your body and get strong at the same time, nothing beats the Caliber app. The Caliber app is 100% free to get started with the ability to upgrade to unlock more features or add a coach for one on one support. The free version of the app provides full ad free access to the app's features, including over 500 exercises, workout tracking, and the ability to create custom exercises. From there, you can upgrade to Caliber Pro, which includes group coaching, or you can upgrade to Caliber Premium, which includes one on one coaching. I've said it before, but Caliber has been life-changing for me. Caliber makes weight and strength training simple and easy. The fact that I'm even doing it is a miracle. It was always so overwhelming and intimidating to me, and Caliber makes it so easy to get started. It gives you step-by-step instructions and even videos showing how to correctly perform the moves. So go check out the Caliber app today. Go to caliberstrong.com/Phetasy to see if any of their versions is right for you. That's caliberstrong.com/Phetasy to get started and get strong. The link is in the description below. Does this go all the way to the bottom? Like it comes from the top, obviously, but does it go down to the professors too?
In many ways, I think professors have been some of the best advocates against this issue or, for academic freedom in this issue because they're the ones that face some of the biggest threats. They're the ones that have sometimes received calls from consulates saying, I don't like what you're teaching, do something about it. And they're the ones that, sometimes been denied visas in a way that's really damaging to their careers. And it's frustrating because I think academics know that it's academia and higher education is a small field and jobs are difficult to get and
Yeah.
maintain. And so I think a lot of incentive and pressure they might personally feel to perhaps choose a safer course for study, for research, one that will not create issues with their job prospects in the future. And that's a shame. And, I think we need to be doing more to ensure academics know that they won't be retaliated against because they upset a foreign power.
Yeah. It's really fascinating to me because we kind of brush over it in a way that we assume everyone understands. The term is pretty self-explanatory, but can you talk a little bit more about the internationalization of higher education?
Absolutely. So, the internationalization of higher ed kind of covers a lot of different grounds. So it covers, the movement of millions of international students, study abroad, joint institutes, satellite campuses, shared research grants, things like that. Um, One I write about in the book that I think is especially interesting is satellite campuses, which I think is kind of the most literal example of how higher ed has become internationalized. And so that's when a university, in this case, an American university, will decide to create a brick and mortar campus in another country. And it's sometimes it's in partnership with another university in that country or with the government itself of that country. But you can go to an American campus in China or the UAE and leave with an American degree. And so there are a lot of financial benefits for universities that come from that. There's a lot of new opportunities they can offer to staff, to students. And so I think, for universities looking at it, it's kind of why wouldn't we create a satellite campus?
Right.
But the problem is a lot of the places where, that appeal has been countries with significantly unfree speech rules. So, the major ones are China, Qatar, and the UAE. And, if you look at the legal restrictions on the ground in these countries, some of them have pretty shocking rules around speech and censorship and protest. And so we've had American universities, with these flowery, strong, beautiful commitments to academic freedom and free expression, going to places like Qatar and opening a campus there. And so it becomes a really complicated question of what are the rules? Who's in charge? Is it the local law or is it university policy? And in my experience, it seems like local law is winning out. And
Yeah.
it doesn't really seem to be much of a mystery why,
Right.
because it's the law in those countries. And I think universities haven't been completely transparent about the ways that they cannot fully account for or challenge what those laws are should there be controversies or censorship issues that arise.
Yeah, that seems very shady. I feel like I read something where I saw, I don't think I read it. Was there something that Free Press was reporting on Qatar and universities, like the money that they were giving to universities? Is that something I saw and again didn't read? Um,
I
did
believe there was reporting on that. I think that I'm not sure of the details of that reporting, but I can talk a little bit about satellite
Qatar?
campuses on the ground in Qatar and what's happened
Do
there.
they send a lot of people to American universities?
Um, it's hard to say. I don't believe that there's a particularly significant international student population coming from Qatar to U.S. universities. But I think the whole point of those campuses is that it allows students to be able to attend those institutions without having to come to the U.S. and to be able
Mm,
to kind of globalize access to those institutions. So, you know, there's much more regional opportunities for people there who want to attend like a Northwestern university
got it.
without the difficulties of having to come to the U.S.
Mhm.
But Northwestern has had its own controversies there in Qatar. There was an incident a few years ago that I think is sort of telling about how these disputes work. So there, they had invited a Lebanese rock band for an event on campus about media, and the lead singer of that band is openly gay. And Northwestern, there was a big controversy about it. They said, we're actually going to try to host this on our campus in the United States and said there were security concerns, so this can't go forward here. But the Qatar Foundation, which is state linked, and it's a body that universities partner with when they want to open up a campus in Qatar, they issued their own statement. They said that's not what happened. They said this event couldn't go forward because it did not correlate with Qatari law and customs. And so you have an American university that cancels an event because there was some controversy over the expressive issues in play. And I think not being completely honest about who canceled the event and why it was canceled. And so that's my concern there, that we will have not just censorship at these campuses, but a lack of accountability for why they're being censored and who is actually ordering the censorship. To me personally, I think it's pretty relevant to know if a state linked body in a foreign country is deciding what can happen on an American campus there. I think it's pretty notable,
Is it
just in
American
general.
though? The minute it's in a foreign country, like you might be an American in a foreign country, but the minute you're in a foreign country, anyone who travels knows this, you're at the mercy of that country.
You
I
are, yes,
mean,
and it's been, I think this is something that universities have done. They would like to say we have these values, and then when those values clash, they say, but they cannot. We still have to abide by local law. That's a specific phrase they like to bring up, local law. And of course, you have to abide by the law of a country. But if there is some major disconnect between what you promise your students and what the law is, you need to be a little bit more upfront about them.
right.
There's a similar incident at Georgetown's campus in Qatar, and there was supposed to be a debate about female depictions of God. Caused a controversy on social media because it was blasphemous, and lo and behold, Qatar has a blasphemy law. So that event ultimately was canceled, and Georgetown said, "We have free speech. We believe in free expression, but it must abide by Qatari law." And so, do you have free expression? I'm not so sure. So
Right.
it's I think there are a lot of interesting debates to have and questions, about what satellite campuses achieve, whether they're still a good thing. And I think there are a lot of good opportunities they provide. But you need to be able to at least upfront be honest about when there is disconnect between what the university promises about free speech and when the legal situation on the ground is very clearly against freedom of expression.
They're like, "Oh, sorry we couldn't host the band there because they would throw the lead singer off the roof of a building but we're gonna have it in Chicago instead. Like,
Yeah,
it's crazy. It's
yeah, and
crazy.
it's, if you ultimately, I think it's better than nothing to try to find alternate venues, but at the root of this, you still need to acknowledge when you're going to have pretty severe limits on free expression on the campus because of what the law says. And I think you owe that to your students. You shouldn't tell them, yeah, it's totally safe to express your mind here and speak your mind, and then say, okay, but not like that.
Right, and it does sound like all of the flowery language that they might have about their commitment to freedom of speech and whatever they're saying in America comes with an asterisk that's like, does not apply to our campuses outside of America.
Yeah, and just at least at minimum be upfront about it. And I think there are really interesting and unique ways that universities could try to address this in a more productive manner. They could say, all right, we're going to investigate what our procedures are. Should there be a censorship controversy, we're going to have rules that state clearly what we're going to do if the government demands we censor something. We're going to be completely honest with our university community about how this will take place, what we will do. But if you just have kind of a mealy mouth, we promise free speech, except for when we don't, people can't really know how you're going to try to address it, and
Yeah.
if you're
I
even going to try.
Why do they feel the need to have these satellite campuses and put themselves in this position other
Uh,
than money?
Well, so money's a big part of it, I think, but I do think that it creates new opportunities and partnerships for research, for students. I think there are a lot of fields where it makes sense to have satellite campuses in other countries. When it comes to medicine or business, finance, anthropology. There are a lot of reasons why it makes sense to have greater ties and greater opportunities for students to be able to access, other parts of the world. I think there are positive things, but when you don't acknowledge the downsides, I think it actually hurts the upsides too, because students should be able to go into that. Academics should go into that fully understanding what their university is going to do for them. And when
Yeah.
it comes to universities in China and satellite campuses there, if I were an academic, I would want to know what my university intended to do if the government, I don't know, arrested me for speaking my
Yeah.
mind. I would like to know if they were going to offer diplomatic assistance, if they were going to threaten to close down the campus if a professor wasn't let free. I think that there actually are ways that they could consider how to use these campuses as a force for more free expression, but you can't really do that if you're not willing to be upfront about the ways that those campuses are being limited in the first place.
Yeah. It does seem like I think about what happened even at Evergreen where the kids have been and just looking at kind of young people's feelings about free speech in general, it seems like the climate is more open to censorship of speech no matter where you are, even if you're in the United States.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm actually just finishing up a piece I'm writing right now that tries to explain why it matters that higher education is operating in the world it's operating in. Um,
Mhm.
you know, if higher ed is global, it matters what the global speech environment looks like. So you're not just contending with speech restrictions that are advancing in the U.S. in really alarming, worrying ways. You also have to know what speech restrictions there are in China and India and Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia is probably one of the next forefronts for university expansion. I think ASU just agreed to open a campus in Riyadh in the future, and nothing bad has ever happened in with regards to Saudi Arabia and free expression. And no
I'm
concerns
just
there.
imagining these, like, freaking slutty Arizona chicks in Riyadh right now, just, like, partying like they do at ASU in Riyadh. Who goes to these who so this is primarily for Saudis to go to ASU, right?
I think it will be for people in Saudi Arabia, people in the region more generally. For people who want to study abroad, um, you know that would be a great opportunity to, if you are at an American campus, and you could say, "Oh wow, I can study at NYU's Shanghai campus. That's great. I can
Mm,
get my study abroad there seamlessly." So I think there's they are global campuses. You'll get people from around the world, but there is a lot more regional opportunities for people that live there.
yeah. This is actually kind of crazy. The whole because it feels like the world at the same exact moment is becoming more globalized and more nationalized at the same time. Like, it feels like the instincts to be more national are rising as the globalization just kind of continues on unchecked, and I know there's a lot of debate in the United States right now about how fair it is to have Americans to compete with everyone else in the world for spots in the American campuses, but maybe the satellite campuses are a way to address some of that. Like, you
And
have
I
Harvard in China, you don't need to lose a spot in Boston.
I think the question of who deserves spots is really complicated. I do think sometimes people fail to realize that international students who tend to pay more can actually make it so that students who are citizens pay less.
Right.
So there is, kind of that counterbalance to it. But it is sort of an interesting question more broadly about how the world feels more global, and that's something that I really think is important to understand. And it's not even a question of is it good or is it bad. You just need to know how it works, because I think you look at any of the global industries and it's obvious what happens. Whether it's tech industries, whether
Mhm.
fashion industry, there is a lot of incentive to appease foreign powers so you can retain access to their markets. And, I don't love it when that is, perhaps a fashion house that's apologizing for offending the Chinese government with a design on a shirt. I don't think it's good then, but I think it's even more worrying when it's higher education, because higher education isn't like every other global industry. We rely on higher education to make sure we understand the world that we live in, that we understand, you know, how things operate, what the world looks like. The research we rely on, a lot of the political debate starts and originates in higher education. So, it is a global industry, but it's not just any global industry. And so the same incentives are in play as there are in the NBA.
Right.
But I think it's even more important and even more concerning when it's the knowledge we rely on that is at risk of this kind of influence.
Are you dealing with an HMO like I am? It's such a pain in the butt. If I want to get any sort of testing done to ensure I'm making my health a priority, I have to wait weeks for an appointment to see my doctor, then get a referral from her, and wait weeks more for an appointment with the specialist I needed to see just to get some lab work. Quest simplifies this process. I can purchase my own lab tests online and test for a multitude of health issues I might be concerned about, then take those results to my doctor better armed with the information I need. At questhealth.com, you can get hundreds of tests across several different categories, from allergies to heart health, hormones, sexual health, women's health tests for egg quantity, perimenopause, menopause, men's health tests for testosterone, prostate, and so much more. These are lab quality tests, the same ones you'd be given at your doctor's office. So prioritize your health and visit questhealth.com today. Use the code Phetasy to get 25% off and find answers to the multitude of health questions you may have. That's questhealth.com and use the code Phetasy for 25% off. Talk to me about the Confucius Institutes. What was the other one that you mentioned in
The Chinese Students and Scholars Association.
yeah, are those what are they doing?
Confucius Institutes are essentially a relationship between an American university and a Chinese university that's managed by the Chinese government. And there isn't anything inherently weird about this. There are other countries like France and Germany and the UK that have these kinds of soft power educational institutions that they encourage universities around the world to work with. So on its face, there's nothing weird there. But the problem is, if you are an authoritarian government, there are naturally going to be some questions that arise about, a university partnering with an educational institution run by a government that likes to jail its critics.
Right.
And so there was, a lot of reasonable concerns about these institutions. And so over the past 5 to 10 years, there's a lot of media attention, legislative attention on Confucius Institutes that ultimately ended up in most of them closing. So I think there's probably a handful of them left here in the US at this point. At their high point, maybe about 115. There's a separate thing called Confucius's Classrooms, the K through 12 setting, but that's, I believe, on its way out as well. But there were a few documented instances of interference from Confucius Institutes where people who worked at the institutes tried to coordinate with university leadership to censor discussions happening on campus, most often about Tibet or Taiwan, to try to ensure that the Chinese government's perspective was the one that was presented on campus. So there were definitely some, concerning incidents that arose just from the institutes themselves. But
Mhm.
more broadly, there's just the question of what kind of incentives does it create for universities when they accept funding from an authoritarian government, and can they navigate um, those contracts, those partnerships in a way that's going to be conducive to academic freedom. I'm not sure that there is, but at least this is probably something I've said 100 times by now. But at least there needs to be transparency
Yeah.
about how the universities are managing these contracts. How is the contract open to the public, or is it a private kind of secret contract that people can't see? Do people know how the teaching materials are being used? Um, these are questions universities have to be able to answer. But for the most part, Confucius Institutes are on their way out. That does not mean that universities' partnerships with Chinese universities are on their way out. But the Confucius Institute itself, you're not going to see those very much on
How
campuses.
how come they're on their way out?
There was a lot of attention, primarily from legislators who were asking universities to explain their partnerships with the Confucius Institutes. There were, a number of senators and representatives who wrote letters to their universities encouraging them to, sever those ties. There were even some states that passed legislation to target the presence of those Confucius Institutes themselves. So and some of it there wasn't even a demand or a requirement, but the amount of media attention I think became sort of untenable, and it became not worth the benefit of having them. So I think a lot of most of the universities just decided either they were kind of pressured to do so, or they just decided this is no longer we're no longer getting what this is costing us.
Yeah.
Legislatively and in the media. So they chose to move on from those. But the other group that I mentioned, the Chinese Students and Scholars Association, or CSSAs, so these are student groups that are at campuses across the US. And again, there's nothing inherently wrong with the CSSA or what the group is, because ultimately what all student groups are places and institutions for people of shared background, interest, values to coordinate together and have events and stay in contact. That's what any student group is. But the problem with CSSAs is they have been involved in many of the attempts to silence speakers on campuses, not just in the US either. This is something that happens on campuses around the world as well. So there have been some pretty disturbing incidents of CSSA chapters trying to pressure university leaders to step in and interfere with student speech on campus. So one of those that I mentioned was at George Washington University, but there were incidents at Brandeis University as well. There was going to be a panel about Uyghur rights and about abuses of minorities within China. And the CSSA chapter there attempted to get the university to cancel it. They had a form letter that they were encouraging people to sign that said, the university needs to be presenting other views of China and that they shouldn't be having this one sided criticism of China take place on campus. And
Mhm.
Brandeis did not cancel the event, but that took place, I believe, in 2020 when everything was on Zoom, and so that event was Zoom bombed. People were playing the national anthem, China's national anthem, over speakers, so it was severely disruptive. I think it's pretty disturbing, the idea that people who have been victims of human rights abuses in China can't fully trust that they would able to come here to the United States and speak freely about it at a college campus. I think that's unnerving. Similarly, at the University of Chicago, there is an exiled Hong Kong activist named Nathan Law, who was a democracy campaigner. He was invited to be part of a speaker series at UChicago, and the CSSA chapter there wrote a letter to the university saying that he was outside the bounds of free expression, that he was not allowed to speak on campus, and that the university had a duty to respect its students and ensure that they didn't feel attacked or treated unfairly on campus. And so there's this term I'm kind of using in the book, sensitivity exploitation,
Yeah.
but this idea that people are using universities' interests to be, or interest in being, a welcoming, open place where people are not targeted for their background or who they are, trying to use that in service of sort of in support of a foreign power that's silencing people's rights. So, they're saying if the university wants to stop hate, they won't have this Tibetan speaker here or this Taiwanese speaker here because it's deeply hurtful to thousands of students on campus.
I mean, we're using it in the United States to silence people, so I don't know why they couldn't figure out how to do it as a foreign power. Like, it's
Well,
not we do this in our own country to each other now, exploit sensitivity to silence critics.
yeah, and that's something that I argue for in the book, that this is why one of the reasons why universities need to be careful that they don't have carelessly written policies, because if you do have a practice of acting against hurtful, insensitive, offensive speech, there are going to be people who have very wide understandings of what those terms are and what they mean, and they're going to want to use it in ways that, to me, read bad faith, but to them, that's their point of view, and so uh, it's much wiser for universities to have at the start viewpoint neutral policies, so they're not being in a position of deciding, okay, whose side do we take when it becomes, when we're deciding who can speak about human rights issues in China, who's allowed to speak and who's it offensive to if we do let this person speak but don't let this other person speak. And it's, very easy, I think, to get pulled into sort of embarrassing mistakes if you
Mhm.
start choosing who can speak based on who's offensive, because these are the kind of situations you're going to come across as a institution with people from around the world.
Right. So I guess there's a couple of things. This leads into the next question I was gonna ask you, just what can be done policy-wise? I guess there's the local, on the school, like you're saying, these viewpoint diversity and neutrality from a policy of the school, but is there anything that can be done in a broader sense to push back against, like, the foreign influence in higher education?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different ways to look at it. So, and you look at the granular level of the university policies, like you said, make sure that you have clear policies that protect free expression and that do not, open Pandora's box of speech restrictions where suddenly you find yourself saying, okay, I guess we have to censor that critic of the Chinese government. Be careful. Don't ever let yourself be put in that position.
Yeah.
So that's a good place to start. Second, I don't think that universities have done a good enough job in listening to and understanding where international students are coming from, and why they might not be able to speak freely. I think it's really important to know if your students, some of your students think that they're going to be reported to a foreign power because they raise their hand in class. So you need to find out, what's happening with those students, or do they have kind of different and unique censorship threats that you could maybe be doing something to assist, but that they're too afraid to speak up to you about because A, they think you won't listen, or B, because they're afraid that your partnerships overseas are going to influence how willing you are to protect Chinese or other students' rights. And so, when we get to speaking of those partnerships, um, that's something that universities need to do a reassessment of, just large scale. A lot of these satellite campuses and institutions were started maybe 15, 20 years ago. And, politics change. The situation on the ground can change really rapidly. You could look at any country around the world, and, sometimes there are massive political changes in the course of weeks. So they need to look at them and say, all right, this was our plan when we opened it in 2003. Are we still able to, make good on those free expression promises we set out to when we opened this 20 years ago? If not, what are we going to do about it? Are we going to close the campus? Are we going to talk to diplomatic officials? Are we going to speak with the government to see if we need to change the terms of this agreement? Do we have whistleblower protections if a professor at a satellite campus needs to share that they are facing some kind of censorship? I think they need to be bringing faculty members in to make them part of that process, because I think academics are going to be much more sensitive to their rights and making sure they're protected in these global institutions in a way that administrators who have sometimes very, very different incentives and goals than academics than they
Mhm.
might be. And they just need to be transparent at a minimum. I think as a safe rule, if you're not willing to state upfront what all of the legal restrictions a country has on speech, you probably shouldn't be opening a campus there. I think that's a pretty safe rule. So if you're not willing to say, this is what this government is going to censor, this is what you can't say, you probably shouldn't have a campus there. Or you should
Right.
at least be willing to admit that you're not going to touch some of these difficult issues that the local government is creating.
And if they were gonna admit that, what would their justification be?
Um, I think on the university side, they, might say, we think that what we're doing here is so valuable that it's worth the complications and infringements on rights. And maybe they think they have a good case for it, but make that case. Don't make the case that there are no real threats to rights when there clearly are.
Mhm.
If you think, the research we're producing, the student experience we can provide, is so valuable, say it. Be willing to defend what your university is doing.
Right. Seems like a lot of just having your cake and eating it too going on. D
Yeah.
How did you get involved with FIRE?
So I was an intern at Fire when I was an undergrad in 2012,
Okay.
and never left.
Hmm.
I was a political science major in college, and had always been really interested in civil liberties issues, and so I'm really glad to be able to do this work. And I write about free speech issues more broadly for Fire, so I have a lot of experience talking about how bad things are everywhere at this
Does it
point.
seem since you were just in undergrad, does it seem worse?
Um, Globally, yes, I think so. In the US, yes.
So,
I'm
yes.
trying to find some good news. Don't have a lot.
You don't need to try and find good news. This is me you're
I'm trying to
talking
be
to.
transparent, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I think facing this stuff head on is better than just trying to it's weird because even today, as we're talking, Grant Linehan has been arrested for tweets. This thing that I'm constantly told doesn't happen, it does happen in the UK, and you're like, UK is it seems lost. I mean, I hear crazy stories, and it's weird too when I really think about how a lot of this stuff, like free speech and capitalism and technology and debanking, that practice of using capitalism to silence people, or in this case, higher education. It seems like no matter which way you turn right now, there's an opportunity to silence people.
Yeah, and in the UK, it's kind of across the board. It's, people being arrested for things they post online, people being visited for things they posted online that are actually criminal, but they're still getting police at their door asking them, "Why did you post this? Your neighbor didn't like it."
It's
There have been
crazy.
people arrested, some pretty shocking arrests because people, are protesting over Palestinian issues, the Online Safety Act, age verification. I think it's kind of, it's what you see when um, a country no longer believes that it can solve its issues with free expression, and it believes that issues have to be solved by silencing free expression, which is a shame. I think I think you don't think very much of your citizenry if you don't think that they can, engage in public debate and discussion with each other without it turning to chaos, because you can protect people's rights. And as I said, I think everything's sort of getting worse globally for free speech. It's sort of across the board, because countries like China, Russia, they're getting worse. But places that we expect to be better on free speech, like the US and like the UK, they're also getting worse. So there's not a lot of good news, and it seems across the board that trust that freedom of expression is an opportunity rather than a challenge and a problem. It seems like that's becoming significantly more prevalent.
Well, on that note, we did live the I it's so funny 'cause I think so much of it, actually, the root of it. I was watching, I've been watching just movies from the '90s that I loved and grew up with, and we're just doing '90s content on my channel when I need to take a week off or whatever, so and it's not grounded in the news cycle, and people seem to love it, and I was watching Dazed and Confused, and my husband was like, "We used to be a proper country." And we were laughing about how you just I because I read the, like, I went on my favorite thing to do is to go on Reddit and read the reviews of Dazed and Confused from these kids who, like, I was like, "Can you imagine not growing up like this and then trying to comprehend?" And they're like, "This is just they're all just perpetuating the cycle of violence and Dazed and Confused because they're all hazing each other." But I'm like, "You guys act like you're not doing this. You just took it online. You're all just bullying each other online and trying to shut each other up and hazing each other, and you're acting like, 'Oh, we're so above this as a culture.'" But most importantly, and I think this really is the root of it, the more and more that I think about all of this conversation, um, particularly around free speech, is that we essentially bought into a surveillance state willingly. We just signed up for it. We walked right into it. It was convenient. It was in our pocket. We've got Ring cameras we're just constantly under surveillance all the time. So the kids are naturally self-censoring in ways that we didn't have to, just because they know that they have to. And I feel like that mentality just lends itself to m- being unable to handle in-person arguments, because so much of it has been taken online, and being unable to kind of handle confrontation or even eye contact, and B, you're, um, you're just used to we're already living in a totalitarian state in some ways in that we're being surveilled all the time everywhere we go nonstop.
Yeah, I think one of the worst tendencies I see right now is whenever people get into a dispute with a stranger in public, they'll immediately start filming it. And it's like
Yeah.
maybe you don't need, maybe not everything needs to be, for the discourse online. Maybe
Yeah.
you could just have a disagreement with somebody and leave it there.
But on the other
I
hand, then you see those things like that thing that happened to the woman in the frickin' in Central Park, the bird, the guy, it was like the dog park lady, and they got
oh,
into that.
I still
And
don't
if
know what happened.
I still but if there hadn't been video of it, the kind of whoever had the last word, that would have been the last word. Like, are we all just supposed to wear body cams around? They're all in our cars, they're all in our we might as well,
I think
and
that's
I'm
what the
sure
new
with these
glasses are
weird
for,
creepy
right?
glasses, yeah, those are creepy too. And I find myself being it makes you paranoid. Like, there were a bunch of us at dinner in LA, and it was a ragtag group of people. Some of us have some sort of profile just from being online, and one was far left. I'm center right, I guess you could consider me, or whatever you wanna call me. Um, and all a little bit like all old school liberal. We were a little bit all over the map, and the 2 women were talking to me, and the 2 people behind me got super quiet, and they both had their phones, like, up like this,
Hmm.
and they weren't talking, and I was like, "They're fucking recording us, I know it." And it made, like, the hairs on my neck stand up, and I still don't know if they were, but I just got it made me so self-conscious, and I was like, I don't even like going out to dinner and eating anymore because I don't know.
Like,
I find myself much more hyper aware of the fact that everyone can record anything all the time everywhere. It
yeah, no,
sucks.
I don't think it's I don't think it's healthy for us to feel the world that way, and I think it's probably why everybody jokes about touching grass all the time because they like the idea of spending 5 minutes not thinking about any of this.
How many yeah, even that though. It just I don't know. I'm not sure, like I see it even with my daughter because she's so little, she's 3, and we've been trying to get the nanny cam out of her room, and she wants it in her room so she can yell to us and we can come to her. It's
She's
really like
making technology work for her. Listen, you got to
I
respect.
mean, she's not dumb. She's like, "I don't want him to get out of bed and walk all the way to your room when I can just
That's
be like,
innovation.
'Mom.'"
We
But
have
I
to
don't
respect the next generation of innovators.
But is she like and on the other hand, I'm like, that doesn't seem good. Someone's giving me shit. They're like, "Get that camera out of there." I'm like, "She won't let us take it out. She wants it in there." But is she wrong to I mean, how many studies have they done that when you know you're being observed, it changes you?
Yeah,
It's like hundreds of thousands of them. I don't know. So are we all just does this lend itself to self-censorship, which lends itself to, well, free speech isn't that important anyway. Like, is it more just that we're living in this I've been trying to figure out why things seem like they're getting so much worse, and a lot of it is rising, political stuff, populism, totalitarianism, but a lot of it, I think, is just that we've bought into a global surveillance state. And I don't
I
know
think
that there's, like, any way out of it either.
I think surveillance is definitely part of it. And I also I think that sometimes it's easy to get used to the benefits of rights without realizing um, that that a lot of progress we have is because of free expression, is because of the things that people have been able to say and the advocacy they've been able to engage in. And so I think sometimes it can be easy to forget um, why those rights matter. But I think I spend a lot of time reading and writing about protest movements all over the world where people are begging for the government to respect their right to speak out. And so I think it's something that you can get too used to, and start to only see what you think are downsides rather than realize why you really need that right in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thanks for writing this book.
Thanks for having me talk about it.
What's your biggest defective character?
Mine?
Mm-hmm.
I'm a really stubborn person in ways that are have blown up in my face occasionally.
Ooh, sounds juicy.
It's for the next book.
Okay. And what is your biggest asset?
My biggest asset.
Being
Uh,
really stubborn.
Honestly, I think it's both. No, I have a pretty good sense of humor about things, which I think has served me well for the most
Also,
part.
it also seems to be something that's going weirdly away.
Hmm, I don't
Like
know.
it's weird at the time that it's still around. Yeah, I'm of two minds about this, but everybody has their thing. And I was saying this on Dumpster Fire just yesterday. I'm like, you don't get to pick and choose which version of the 70s humor we get back. Like, it's all or nothing. You don't get to be like, oh, I like you making fun of you. I was doing like an RFK Jr. impression, and they were like, that's too far, Bridget. I was like, oh, this is a line for you guys. Okay. This is the line, not the 10 million other offensive things I've said on the show.
You just have to be stubborn, right?
Yeah. Or just annoying, which I guess
I mean,
probably
there
my
is
biggest defective character.
some overlap between the two at times, but
Where are you based? Are you in DC?
I'm in Philadelphia.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's nice. You like it
Yeah,
there?
yeah. I'm from here. I love Philly. I'm a creature for Philadelphia, so I'll defend it. Go to the
Got
mat
it.
for Philly.
Okay, well, where can we find you and all your work? And thank you so much for writing your book, and I hope everybody buys it. And it's such like an important it's so complicated,
Yeah,
it's like there's so many different things at play.
yeah.
I don't
Well, you
really
can
know how to
find
parse it
my.
all.
I do my best with it in the book.
You do a good job.
Thank you. You can find it on major book selling websites, Amazon, Johns Hopkins University Press. And if you're interested in my other writing about just global free speech news more broadly, Fire has a newsletter called the Free Speech Dispatch where I write about that monthly.
Yes. And where can we are you online?
I am online. I am on all the major sites. I'm at Sarah EMCLAUGH on X.
Okay.
It's really hard to get a handle with my name. There's a lot of Sarah McLaughlins out there, which you may have guessed at. So gotta be
Well,
creative.
I like it. I appreciate you. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
This has been Walk-Ins Welcome with Bridget Phetasy. I'm Bridget Phetasy, and you're welcome. It's the dumbest line.